In 1861, the Reverend Dr. Isaac Helmuth was appointed Archdeacon of Huron by Bishop Benjamin Cronin, first Bishop of Huron. Bishop Cronin wanted to establish a college in the diocese and sent Helmuth to England to gather support and raise funds for a building. Helmuth had his own personal vision for an educational institution of higher learning, but for now it would have to wait. His immediate task as principal of Huron College was to establish the corporation. On July 1st, 1862, the former home of London merchant Lionel Rideout was purchased, along with the surrounding acreage known as Rough Park. This original building was later modified, and a large wing was built to the north. It would remain home to Huron College for the next 90 years, and for 30 of those years it would shelter a struggling Western University of London, Ontario. By the time of Cronin's death in 1871, it was apparent that theological graduates were lacking advanced training in the arts. Archdeacon Helmuth, who had resigned his position as principal to become Dean of Huron and rector of St. Paul's Cathedral, was appointed the second Bishop of Huron and began a public and political campaign to establish a university in the diocese. In 1978, as part of Western centenary celebrations, Professor J.J. Tallman commented on Helmuth's Jewish upbringing and his subsequent conversion to Christianity.
Born in Warsaw and aimed to be a rabbi. And he went to England and was converted to Christianity into a very low type of Church of England churchmanship. And that low, it's not a pejorative word, that's a word they use. That low churchmanship appealed to Bishop Cronin, the Bishop of Huron, and he brought Helmuth from a teaching job at Lennoxville to the diocese here and gave him the job of setting up Huron College. And he did well at that. But early on, he had an idea that he wanted a university. He wanted to cap his building of educational institutions with a university. I think that he had a real idea of developing education so that the clergy students at Huron College could get a higher education than a higher level of education than they were getting, and also other people could get an education.
In 1877, Helmuth petitioned the Ontario legislature for an act of incorporation of a college with university powers in connection with the Church of England. 3 months later, on March the 7th, 1878, the Lieutenant Governor gave royal assent to the bill incorporating the Western University of London, Ontario. The campus was located north of St. James Street between Wellington and Waterloo Streets in the former Helmuth College for Boys. The Senate renamed the building Dufferin College and began arts and divinity instruction in October 1881 and medicine in October 1882. Enrollment in arts began with 15 students, but dropped to 7 the following year. In 1884, Bishop Helmuth unexpectedly resigned as chancellor and returned to England. His energy and enthusiasm had kept the university going through these early years, and his departure was a severe blow. Many financial pledges could not be collected, and when Huron College withdrew from affiliation a few months later, the arts faculty was forced to close. The Faculty of Law, launched in 1885, unable to gain provincial recognition, collapsed 2 years later, leaving only medicine to keep the university afloat. Its faculty consisted of London physicians who taught on a part-time basis. They built a medical school at the corner of Waterloo and York Streets and operated as a private consortium. Meanwhile, chronically short of cash, the University Senate was unable to make payments on its Dufferin College mortgage. The building was seized by creditors and demolished. The university ended its affiliation with the Church of England and in 1908 became a secular university. The City of London assumed financial responsibility for the arts faculty with an annual grant of $5,000. It was later increased to $15,000. A new system of administration was adopted. A Senate looked after academic matters, while a 12-man Board of Governors was charged with handling the finances and property affairs of the university. They brought a new sense of purpose and began to implement a series of programs and reforms that eventually led to remarkable improvements in the financial and academic stature of the university. On September 18, 1908, Provost Nathaniel C. James was appointed Western's first president, and survival of those difficult years could be attributed in great measure to James and his leadership. Amiable and persuasive, he was a skilled fundraiser. Historian Stuart Wallace once recounted how, on several occasions, James had ridden his bicycle into downtown London seeking cash donations from local businesses in order to meet the university's monthly payroll. In 1930, Professor W.F. Tamblyn wrote, "1908 was the real birth of the university, and everything that had gone on before was merely the embryonic, prenatal stage." The Institute of Public Health in London was opened in 1912. The building, financed and equipped by the provincial government, was turned over to the university in 1913. Space in the institute that wasn't needed for medical analysis work provided laboratory facilities for teaching medicine and science. In 1917, in recognition of its teaching role, the institute received full faculty status and became the first faculty of public health in North America to offer a diploma in public health and the Certificate of Public Health Nurse. As early as 1910, Board Vice Chair J.W. Little had envisioned and campaigned for a separate campus with its own buildings. Following his sudden death in 1913, his son Arthur Little was appointed to the board and brought with him his father's vision and determination. In order to consolidate activities across the city to one location, he led negotiations to purchase the Kingsmill family farm. The 150-acre site was the former home of Tom and Ann Kingsmill and their 8 children. In 1898, they had returned to the city, leaving their homestead, Bellevue, standing empty on a bluff overlooking the Thames River. The London Hunt Club had developed 40 acres of the property into a golf course, and members established facilities in Glenmore, a converted farmhouse near Medway Creek at the southern end of present-day Westminster College. Critics argued that the site was inaccessible and, as they said, halfway to Lucan, but the board finally acquired the property in 1916 for $25,000. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 affected the university in many ways. The Faculty of Medicine proposed the formation of a stationary hospital, and over 70 area physicians offered their services. Commanded by Dr. Edwin Seaborn, the unit first served in England, operating 2 general hospitals, before transferring to Calais, France in 1917. Officially known as No. 10 Stationary Hospital, it was often referred to as the Western University Unit. This was the first time the university as a corporate entity had received international recognition. Following closure of the hospital in 1919, Edwin Seaborn returned to London and remained in private practice until retiring in 1948. The Faculty of Medicine, still operating as a private consortium, was severely criticized by the Flexner Report released in 1910, which examined medical schools both in the U.S. and Canada. Its author, Benjamin Flexner, didn't mince words about Western's poor facilities. The school needed to replace the now dilapidated and overcrowded quarters on Waterloo Street. The building was turned over to the Board of Governors, and medicine was given full faculty status in the hope of government aid, but it wasn't forthcoming. The Ontario legislature refused financial aid for a new building. The City of London, however, granted $100,000, and supporters and alumni of the school raised another $150,000. To meet the estimated cost of $450,000, the Board of Governors assumed a $200,000 mortgage. Construction by London contractor John Peterborough began in 1919 on Ottaway Avenue, later renamed South Street, and was the beginning of a long association of Peterborough and the university. The need to be near a hospital did not permit the building to be located on the new campus, but nevertheless, it marked the beginning of Western's building program. Meanwhile, at Huron College, the university struggled to provide teaching space for the influx of students following the closing of the war. Every inch of space was utilized, including a small barn behind the college, which was converted to a physics and chemistry teaching lab. On September the 9th, 1919, Western's second president, Ernest Braithwaite, suddenly tendered his resignation. Appointed in 1914, Braithwaite had worked hard for the university, but despite his many personal achievements, the Board of Governors was not prepared to renew his contract for another term. Whatever happened involving the reappointment of Dr. Braithwaite is still unclear. Neither the university nor Braithwaite have made the reasons public. Although popular with students, he was a shy, retiring man who never really became a part of the London establishment. Ernest Braithwaite never took Western into the Promised Land. He reached the border only to be denied the pleasure of seeing it for himself. A little more than a month later, the Hearst Tory government went down to defeat in a provincial election. The United Farmers of Ontario, led by Ernest Drury, formed a one-term coalition government which had an enormous impact on education and social reform in the province. Government financial aid was extended to universities other than Toronto. Western received $800,000 for new buildings and $200,000 to cancel the mortgage on the new medical school building. The City of London again supported the university with a grant of $250,000, and the County of Middlesex, convinced that the presence of the university would make business and agriculture more prosperous, granted $100,000 for a memorial tower to honor the county's war dead. These grants marked the beginning of surrounding county financial cooperation with the City of London and the provincial government in support of the Western University. The future was unfolding. Western had land to develop, proven financial support, and a Board of Governors with a vision. Two men who quite literally shaped that future were Detroit architect Frederick Spear and Scottish town planner Thomas Adams. Spear drew the first concept for the new campus with a bridge linking the property to Richmond Street. He recommended the building should be in the style of modified collegiate Gothic, clad in gray sandstone with limestone trim. John Moore and Associates, who became Western's official architects, later modified these sketches. On April 15, 1922, Lord Byng of Vimy, Governor-General of Canada, paid an official visit to London. Included was a simple ceremony on the grounds of the new campus near the present Allen and Betty Taylor Library. A large crowd had gathered on the site by the time His Excellency's entourage arrived, transported in a fleet of London Sixes, a car manufactured here in the Forest City. Despite the muddy, wet conditions, Lord Byng performed the sod turning with good humor, and he asked, "Is there any particular way to throw this?" On May 17, 1 month after Lord Byng's ceremonial dig, Thomas Adams precisely fixed the location of the proposed bridge and the first two buildings. Even in 1922, Adams foresaw the day when automobiles would clog the campus. He recommended a circular concept with the center remaining permanently open. The contract for the bridge was awarded to John Peterborough in August 1922. He not only hired teamsters with their horse-drawn wagons, but also was the first London contractor to utilize a steam-powered shovel. Officially open to traffic in November 1923, the structure was the first ornate bridge in southwestern Ontario, blending perfectly with the new structures rising on campus. Peterborough had already begun work on the Science Building when Secord and Sons began construction of the Arts Building in September 1922. Secord had the contract for the more prestigious main building, but Peterborough had very skilled masons. A rivalry developed between the two, and before it was all over, the Science Building was just as impressive as its neighbor. On June the 8th, 1923, work was halted so that Premier Drury and university officials could lay the cornerstones for both buildings. Each stone contained a bottle describing the history and development of the university. There was a great feeling of joy and vindication for those visionary members of the board who had placed such great faith in the future of the university. Even Sir Adam Beck, who earlier had opposed government funding for the university, congratulated his political adversary, Ernest Drury. 30 years later, almost to the day, upon the recommendation of President G. Edward Hall, Western conferred an honorary degree upon Ernest Drury for his political fortitude in extending financing to Ontario's regional universities, and for his pioneering and lifelong efforts in conservation of the environment. The Science Building, now renamed the Physics and Astronomy Building, enjoys a commanding position on campus. The special contributions by Hamilton stonemason Dan Cree continue to produce countless admirers. Possessing a crafty chisel and lots of imagination, he was given free rein by Peterborough to decorate the projecting stone beams on the windows and doorways. The rather plain limestone arches took on form and color and are considered to display some of the finest on-site carvings in Ontario. On one occasion, Cree was asked why he was carving the face of the sun in that particular location. "Oh, it's a bit dull today," came the reply, "so I thought I'd coax him out to see his picture." Old Bill, cartoonist Bruce Bairnfather's deathless caricature of the First World War British Tommy, survived the Great War only in crayon, but here his beady eye, walrus mustache, tin hat, and cheery disposition are permanently fixed in limestone. He is not alone. Indian Chief Tecumseh, the boy with toothache, the Yorkshire farmer, all add their distinctive touch to the front elevation. One particular carving bears a remarkable likeness to then Registrar K.P. Neville. On the third floor of the building was a 100-seat cafeteria. Long lines would form in the east and west stairwells. While waiting, students and staff were often treated to the odors of dissected animals, formaldehyde, and other fragrances indigenous to a biological and chemical building. Well, for whatever reason, this tended to reduce the appetites of the slowly advancing patrons. University College is synonymous with the University of Western Ontario. Designed for both utility and beauty, the building was situated by Adams to forever retain its dominance of the UWO skyline. The most notable external feature is the Middlesex Memorial Tower. Architect John Moore added extra height and a belfry to Spear's original concept. Inside the tower, on the main floor, is the memorial tablet listing the names of the men and women from Middlesex County who gave their lives in World War I. Nearby is another memorial, the embarkation roll of members of the 10th Stationary Hospital. Across the hall is a listing of the men of the university who died in World War II. 5 years earlier, the Board of Governors changed the name of the university. London was restrictive and didn't really reflect the increasing diversity of the constituency of the university. Southwestern Ontario was accurate but clumsy. But the board wanted to keep Western in the title for historical reasons. The debate was finally settled on May the 8th, 1923. The Western University of London, Ontario became the University of Western Ontario. The Board of Governors' room was here, over the main entrance on the second floor. This scene, depicting a meeting of the board, is the only surviving frame from a 1928 movie produced by Fred Coates and the Faculty of Medicine, celebrating Western's Golden Jubilee. This narrow staircase provides access to the belfry and the top of the tower. On the fifth floor of the tower, a water tank was installed to increase water pressure. The water was pumped to the tank from a well near the boiler house. Due to its height above the campus, it provided an excellent auxiliary system for flushing toilets and watering the lawns. The belfry is in here. Architect John Moore had planned originally for the addition of a clarion, but it was never installed. Well, here we are, 126 feet later, and the top of Middlesex Memorial Tower offers an impressive view. The tower offers a privileged view of Convocation Hall, protected by the only copper roof on campus. It is the university's most impressive work of architecture. Designed to accommodate major academic and social functions, nothing was spared in its creation. The original hall, 75 feet long and 41 feet wide, has a ceiling height of 31 feet. Seating capacity, including the balcony, was 700. A stage provided for plays. In 1998, the hall was modernized and restored to its former grandeur. In recognition of a generous gift from Caroline Conran in memory of her husband, Brandon Conran, professor of English and a former chairman of the Board of Governors, Convocation Hall was renamed Conran Hall. Along the exterior wall are 5 stained glass windows presented to the university by Colonel T.S. Hobbs. Rising 23 feet, they are uniform with one exception. Each contains 6 different coats of arms from Canadian universities and colleges. Across the hall, a replica of each is cut out of the interior wall. John Moore had drawn the final plans for the hall, but visiting architects recognized the work as that of Frederick Spear. His influence remained. The official opening ceremony took place on October 16th and 17th. Chancellor William Roche, who also happened to be Western's first medical graduate in 1883, declared the buildings open. Construction occurred during a period that saw the decline in the use of the horse as a working animal. In 1922, there were perhaps as many as 30 horses being worked on the campus, but by the early 1930s they had all but vanished. In 1937, the last team of horses, 2 Belgian mares, were sold by the university, complete with wagon and harness, for $400. In 1927, the board revived the office of president, with the appointment of Sherwood Fox as Western's 3rd president. Fox, an experienced administrator, had played a key role in the development of the new campus and its style of architecture during his tenure as Dean of Arts. He took a personal interest in the beautification of the campus, and in 1933 he declared, "Virtually, this area will become a tree and plant sanctuary." The Sherwood Fox Arboretum was officially established in 1980 under the direction of plant sciences professor Jim Phipps.
The number of different kinds is perhaps in the neighborhood of 750, but since we haven't finished identifying, that is only a guess. My ideal hopes would be for a fine arboretum of 5,000 different kinds, which we would have in replicates of 5, because we've got to have protection against accidental loss of any individual.
The tradition of the graduating class planting a tree each year echoes this commitment. Just as these graduates planted a tree in 1932, so have many others before and after. It was the class of 1924 that initiated the tradition. That year, a Japanese ginkgo tree was planted. Despite being moved twice to accommodate building additions, it continues to add interest and beauty to the lawn of University College. A volunteer group called Friends of the Gardens maintains several areas like this on campus for the enjoyment of the community. Both private individuals and other university groups continue to improve these sites and to create new natural areas. The first addition to come after the original buildings was the J.W. Little Memorial Stadium. Construction was made possible by a legacy from the widow of Colonel J.W. Little. John Peterborough began construction in early June and completed the task in time for the opening of the September 15, 1929 rugby season. Before the kickoff at the first home game on October 19th, officials gathered for the dedication ceremony. Board Chairman Arthur Little and Chancellor Cockshut joined Reverend John Inkster, and Arts 28 grad John Willis carried the Western flag. The Mustangs lost that first home game to Queen's University 25-2, but 2 years later, under the guidance of legendary coach Joe Breen, the team won the first of many senior intercollegiate championships. A decade later, coach John Metris was to continue the tradition of Western's supremacy and success in football.
We used to keep a pretty good record on all our kids, and we figured from around the early 40s until, well, I think a lot of it was still going on yet, that 70% of the athletes I know in football and basketball were always in the top 1/3 of the university standing, and that's the type of kid you like to have coach.
One outstanding athlete was Joe Kroll, basketball star and a member of the legendary undefeated 1939 football team. In 1986, Kroll and several members from that 39 team participated in a special halftime ceremony in JW Stadium.
We had a very versatile team. I thought probably one of the best they've had here in Western for a long time.
The stadium was built specifically for football, but hosted many other events, ranging from this 1932 track meet to rock concerts featuring the likes of the Doobie Brothers. In 1983, the Royal Canadian Regiment paraded before its Honorary Colonel-in-Chief, His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. This, however, was not his first visit to the stadium. In 1959, Queen Elizabeth and the Duke visited London as part of a Canadian royal tour. Following their entrance into the JW Stadium, His Royal Highness asked, "If this is the little stadium, where is the big one?" Beginning in 1932, J.W. Little Memorial Stadium replaced Convocation Hall as the site for spring convocation. A highlight of each ceremony was the student and faculty procession down University Hill. The sun always seemed to shine on spring convocation, and for the next 3 decades, the ceremony was seldom interrupted by adverse weather. The summer school students of 1924 were the first to actually cross the bridge into the Promised Land and occupy the new buildings. Western Summer School had begun in 1918, and by the 1930s, enrollment reached almost 1,000 students. Many of them lived in what became known as Tent City near the J.W. Little Stadium. Payment of $6 provided an electrical hookup and access to the washrooms and showers in the stadium. A separate library to replace the cramped basement quarters in the Arts Building became a reality in 1933, when Mrs. Frank Lawson left a bequest for a memorial to her husband. Peterborough began excavations on January 2nd, 1934, during a particularly bitter winter. Progress was so rapid, however, that by the end of June the building was completely finished. About this time, President Sherwood Fox had become interested in the work of area archaeologists Amos and son Wilfred Jury, who had amassed an impressive collection of native artifacts from the surrounding counties. The collection was donated to the university and given space in the new Lawson Library. In 1946, the museum collection was officially named the Museum of Indian Archaeology and Pioneer Life, and Wilf was appointed curator. His wife, Mary Alice MacLeod Murray, known to everyone as Elsie, formed a professional partnership with Wilf, and for the next 30 years they made valuable contributions to our knowledge and appreciation of Native peoples, not only in Ontario, but throughout Canada and North America. In 1981, the museum moved from its second home in Middlesex College to the Lawson Jury Building in northwest London, adjacent to the Lawson Archaeological Site and the reconstruction of an Iroquoian village. In 1939, the government reduced grants to its 3 provincially supported universities. Premier Hepburn announced that the government had been too generous towards the universities, and money should be directed into primary schools rather than to assist universities to clutter up the professions. Western students launched balloons carrying protest notes and then staged a massive march into downtown London. For the most part, their protests fell on deaf ears. The general public had little sympathy for university students who were considered part of the privileged class. The advent of war, however, quickly changed the direction of government policy. Ontario's universities intensified research involving medical and military problems. Western's Department of Physics conducted radar research in great secrecy from the Sciences Building. Researchers in the medical school built a decompression chamber to study the effects of high-altitude flight on bomber pilots. The RCAF officer directing this research in Ottawa, under the supervision of Sir Frederick Banting, was Wing Commander Dr. Edward Hall, who visited the medical school on April 9, 1941. John Peterborough supervised construction of the first observatory on any Canadian university campus in the winter of 1939. A gift from Mrs. Frances Amelia Cronin and her family, in memory of her husband, Hume Cronin, the observatory was equipped with a refracting telescope boasting a 10-inch lens, the largest ever ground in the Western Hemisphere. It would take another 15 years before Western hired its first full-time astronomer, Dr. William Whalow. A decade later, he led the charge to establish a dynamic astronomy program as part of the overall science curriculum. The formation of a Department of Astronomy was followed by the construction of a new observatory with a 48-inch reflector telescope to the north of the campus at Elginfield. This facility, equipped with a state-of-the-art high-resolution spectrograph, continues to make important discoveries in the world of astronomy. The support of civic-minded citizens was to continue through a bequest from Mrs. Wilhelmina McIntosh in September 1940 of funds to construct an art gallery. She stipulated that the university must have a structure in place within 2 years, or the bequest would revert to the University of Toronto. Well, within 3 months, construction began. On June 27, 1941, Mrs. McIntosh's sister, Mrs. Mary Moorhouse, laid the cornerstone, assisted by contractor John Peterborough. The lower level of the gallery became the home of the Conservatory of Music, and alumni from the 40s and early 50s remember the McIntosh Gallery as the Music Building. These walnut trees, carefully protected during construction of the gallery, are the oldest planted trees on campus and a direct link with the past heritage of the property. They mark the original laneway to Bellevue House. This is the same laneway traveled by Lord Byng when he arrived on site in 1922. In front of Middlesex College, more walnut trees indicate the easterly limit of the laneway. Just beyond stood Bellevue. The house was demolished in 1916, but here and there, evidence of the past pokes through the forest floor. In June 1943, the board began discussions with Dr. Edward Hall to assume the position of Dean of Medicine. He was offered the position in 1944, but couldn't join Western's faculty as professor in medical research and Dean of Medicine until January 1945, following his release by the RCAF. 1946 marked the beginning of campus expansion and a major shift in governance. First, the two wings of the science building were joined to make a quad, and a zoological laboratory was built on the foundations of the former Kingsmill barn, which had been destroyed by fire a few years earlier. A smaller building near the greenhouses was constructed through a legacy from the Waugh family. A number of refurbished huts purchased from the RCAF Bombing and Gunnery School at Fingal served a multitude of purposes. Fingal Hall contained a cafeteria to replace the one in the science building. Everyone hoped that this new cafeteria would fare better than its predecessor, but unfortunately, in spite of good intentions, it was frequently infested with cockroaches and marauding rats from the nearby river. President Fox announced his resignation, and Dean of Medicine G. Edward Hall was declared president-elect. During his term as dean, Hall outlined plans to move the now crowded medical school to the main campus and establish a faculty of dentistry. The School of Nursing was moved to the campus as the first planned step to establish the Health Sciences Complex, and the Public Health Building was handed back to the government. George Edward Hall was formally installed at a special ceremony in Convocation Hall on March the 7th, 1948. At the age of 39, Hall was the youngest university president in the country and had enjoyed a relatively short but brilliant academic career. As Western's fourth president, he would lead the university through the greatest expansion in its history and guide it from a relatively obscure regional institution to become a prominent national university with an enviable international reputation. That special Founders' Day ceremony also celebrated Western's 70th anniversary. Sir David Parry, Vice-Chancellor of the University of London, presented a silver mace symbolizing friendship between the two Londons to Western's Chancellor Arthur Ford. Dr. James Bertram Collip became the new Dean of Medicine, and to accommodate his research and staff requirements, the new zoological building was enlarged and renamed the Collip Medical Research Laboratory. The Department of Medical Research continued to occupy the building until it was disbanded in 1965, 2 years after Dr. Collip's death. In 1974, the Department of Zoology was finally able to take possession of its building. The York Street building, home of the second medical school, was sold in 1941 and converted to a warehouse. In 1946, shortly before its demolition to make way for a new central fire hall, several former graduates visited to pose for a final portrait. The only surviving artifact from the building is the newel post of the stairway to the main entrance, which is now incorporated into a stair railing in one of the present-day medical school's lecture rooms. The Faculty of Graduate Studies was established in 1947, and 2 years later, Ken Carroll, who had studied under Dr. Collip, became Western's first PhD recipient. Dr. Carroll, in fact, remained at Western, and during a distinguished 50-year career, became a familiar figure on campus riding his ancient bicycle. Western grew quickly as a research-intensive university, and today the number of PhDs that have been conferred exceeds 5,000. The largest construction project since the Arts Building began on June the 16th, 1948, when Arthur Little turned the sod for Thames Hall. The contractor, Pickett Construction, had difficulty finding enough qualified stonemasons and took the unusual step of flying several masons directly from Scotland to the job site. These four continued to work on other campus buildings and may be responsible for the folklore about Scottish masons building the university. The project was plagued by material shortages and several strikes. The board had secured the services of the Governor-General of Canada, His Excellency Viscount Alexander of Tunis, who was to receive an honorary Doctor of Laws degree. Extensive camouflage was performed throughout the building to hide unfinished areas, and the ceremony proceeded without incident. At no time did His Excellency seem to notice the unfinished state of the building, both inside and out. A year later, Premier Frost received Western's first honorary civil law degree and officially opened the new pool and gymnasium. The pool was a gift from Major General A.C. Spencer and his sister, Mrs. Josephine Niblett, in memory of their father, William Melville Spencer. The gymnasium was named in honor of Colonel George Eric Reed, a London businessman who was the first to conceive and support the idea of a physical education building on campus.
At a conference of business leaders held at the university in 1948, it was suggested that Western, with 28 years of experience operating a successful undergraduate department of business administration that held strong ties to Harvard, would be the ideal site for a national business school offering graduate degrees. During the Christmas break of 1951, the school moved from its basement quarters in University College to Goodhome, a large Tudor residence purchased by the university.
The long-term aim, however, was to gather the whole faculty onto the campus, and in 1956, a generous gift from Mr. R.G. Ivey, former chair of the Business School Advisory Committee, enabled tenders to be called for a new building. The Richard G. Ivey School of Business Administration building opened in September 1957. After its secularization in 1908, Western entered into affiliation with several religious colleges. Anglican Huron College affiliated in 1909. Huron had purchased land on Western Road in 1932, and in 1950 began what Bishop Luxton described as the greatest domestic missionary adventure of the 20th century. The new and expanded college opened in 1951. The original building on St. James Street, site of Western's second campus, was emptied of its treasures and demolished. Roman Catholic Assumption College in Windsor and Ursuline College in Chatham affiliated in 1919. Several Ursuline sisters moved to the former Whiskered residence on Wellington Street in London, and the dwelling became known as Brescia Hall. In 1924, a new Brescia Hall was built on the site to the west of the new university campus, and was formally opened in 1926 to coincide with the celebration of Catholic Centennial Week in London. St. Peter's Seminary affiliated in 1939, and in 1954 established the College of Christ the King as a church-related residence college. In 1966, the title was changed to King's College, and it too became an affiliate of the university. For almost 30 years, a small sign marked the entrance off Richmond Street to University Drive, but that changed in 1953 with a bequest from Mrs. Edna Jeffrey to construct a memorial entrance in memory of her husband, A.O. Jeffrey, former president of London Life. Adjacent to the entrance was a popular little restaurant operated by Mr. and Mrs. Albert Nino, known as the Happy Hours restaurant. It was purchased by an anonymous benefactor of the university. The building was demolished in 1956, along with a house to the south, and the area was landscaped to complement the Jeffrey bequest. A new administration building was named in honor of Dr. W.J. Stevenson, a generous benefactor whose estate made construction possible. The laying of the cornerstone for Stevenson Hall was one of the last public functions performed by Chairman Arthur Little on behalf of the university. The soil from the building excavation was spread over the eastern end of the practice football field, finally putting an end to a long-standing complaint about the uneven ground and the profusion of gullies and potholes.
Journalism was established as a department in 1946 with the strong support of Arthur Ford, editor-in-chief of the London Free Press, who also happened to be Western's chancellor. The program was reorganized as a self-contained school within the Faculty of Graduate Studies, and former editor of the Toronto Telegram, Andrew McFarlane, became the founding dean. In 1993, the Senate, on a vote of 45 to 34, voted to close the school. But a few weeks later, the Board of Governors overturned the Senate recommendation by a vote of 13 to 12. In 1998, the Graduate School of Library and Information Science, founded in 1966, and the Graduate School of Journalism became the Faculty of Information and Media Studies.
President Hall had frequently noted the lack of recognition for Western's founder, Bishop Isaac Helmuth. Professor Murray Barr had suggested that one of the new buildings could be named for Helmuth, but nothing came of it. Finally, on September the 28th, 1962, a rain-soaked gathering watched Premier John Robarts unveil a memorial plaque in a small archway which was part of an addition to Stevenson Hall. Helmuth was further recognized beginning in 1997 with the establishment of the Helmuth Prizes by Vice President Research Bill Bridger. The awards recognize research achievement of a substantial body of work, and the first recipients were Professor Alan Davenport and Professor Ian Steele. On December the 17th, 1954, Arthur Little, the last surviving member of that visionary Board of Governors who had so boldly established the university on the new campus, tendered his resignation. Little had practically made a career of his position, and an appreciative university awarded him the title of Chairman Emeritus. Less than a year later, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Ingram, Little's successor, watched Sandy Somerville turn the sod for Somerville House, named in honor of his father, Charles Somerville, former board chairman and London mayor. Following the opening of Somerville House, its predecessor, Fingal Hall, was dismantled. The central section was moved intact and incorporated into a church complex. An enterprising Dutch contractor salvaged enough wooden beams from the rest to build 2 houses. Most students relied on private accommodations, and each year there was a blitz of area homes seeking rooms for rent. As the student population continued to increase, lack of adequate student housing reached a crisis level.
Important that we plan now for the future to make sure that these students coming from remote parts of the country, from all parts of Canada and from foreign lands, have adequate accommodation.
The first campus residence for men, Medway Hall, constructed in 1959, was followed by a second all-male residence, Sydenham Hall, named for Charles Thomson, a London businessman who in 1840 was created first Baron Sydenham. During their first year of joint operation, over 1,300 students applied for the 600 available spaces. Delaware Hall, named to commemorate the first settlement on the Thames River in Middlesex County, provided beds for 452 women. But it was not enough, and again, student accommodation became a serious issue. The Glenmore Apartments were the first of several residential complexes to provide accommodation for both men and women, as well as married students with children. The completion of several new residential buildings now provides space for all first-year students who require accommodation. Another issue was the overall growth of the university itself. While some growth was inevitable, President Hall was particularly concerned with maintaining the character and quality of the Western experience.
Situated here. The Board of Governors decided that we could and must indeed, in fairness to the people of the Dominion of Canada, increase by perhaps twice the number of students accommodated at the present time. We feel here too that those inimitable things which have been associated with Western, which has made its character, can be maintained with our expansion in progress.
Within a few months, Western began a $5 million expansion program. The Waugh Botanical Building and the old greenhouses were demolished. The name plaque for the building is affixed here to an interior wall in the Biological Geological Sciences building that now occupies part of the original site. New enlarged greenhouses were constructed adjacent to the new facility. The expansion of engineering to a 4-year program and increasing enrollment was met by the Alexander Charles Spencer Science Engineering Building, named in recognition of a $1 million donation by General Spencer and his sister Josephine Spencer Niblett. A year later, the Department of Engineering received full faculty status. Alan Davenport began investigating the effects of strong wind turbulence at low atmosphere, and in 1965 he became director of the Boundary Layer Wind Tunnel, officially opened by Dr. K.F. Tupper, vice president of the National Research Council. Many structures have been tested at the facility, including the CN Tower in Toronto and some of the world's largest suspension bridges. The Smallman Memorial Entrance, a gift from Lieutenant Colonel J.E. Smallman, greatly improved the Western Road entrance and harmonized perfectly with the new engineering building. At the dedication ceremony, President Hall was joined by former UWO President Sherwood Fox. In May of 1958, Sherwood Fox was honored with a testimonial dinner in recognition of his long and dedicated service to the university. While Dean of Arts in 1922, Fox had taken a lead role in determining Western's style of architecture. On September the 16th, 1959, after a lapse of 72 years, the Faculty of Law was resurrected at Western. A further generous gift from Josephine Spencer Niblett enabled construction of the new law building bearing her name. The School of Nursing moved into its new building, and Edward Hall moved into Gibbons Lodge, purchased as the official residence of the president. Middlesex College was finally completed months behind schedule. Its clock tower enhanced the visual appeal of the UWO skyline and added a new dimension to the campus: sound. Meanwhile, the engineering students had gained a reputation as the campus pranksters, and one eventful Halloween targeted the Cronin Observatory dome. However, the clock face of Middlesex College provided new opportunities. In 1959, the Board of Governors began plans for the new medical school, and before its completion in 1965, Premier John Robarts announced the second dental school in the province would be built on Western's campus. The final piece of Edward Hall's vision of the health sciences complex, University Hospital, opened in 1972. Talbot College became the third college in the Faculty of Arts and Science in 1966. Named in honor of Colonel Thomas Talbot, it housed a variety of departments and a well-equipped theater. In 1947, the university began a Department of Music, which closed in 1956 in favor of the Music Teachers College. The college became a constituent of the Faculty of Arts and Science and moved into the vacated Goodhome property, which was renamed the A.E. Silverwood Building. On July 1, 1968, as part of the reorganization of the Faculty of Arts and Science, the college became a separate Faculty of Music. In 2002, following a $3 million donation from alumnus Don Wright, the name was changed to the Don Wright Faculty of Music.
Music is an eternal thing, and a thing that can only grow and grow and grow, and without music, it's kind of a non-happy life.
The last major construction project of the Hall years was Alumni Hall. This new facility opened up a new phase in the cultural life of the university and the City of London. The multi-use auditorium became home for the Spring Convocation, which hosts and honors many Canadian and international men and women of distinction.
In 1974, Maureen Forrester received an honorary music degree and departed from the customary speech by singing "Thanks to Thee" to her fellow graduates. In quite a different vein, when His Royal Highness Prince Philip was honored in 1983 for his leadership role with the Wildlife Fund, he offered this comment on the awarding of honorary degrees.
Honorary degrees are for corporation presidents, bishops, real estate agents, presidents of the United States, and other such riffraff.
Increasing opposition to the college system and demands for a greater role in the administration and policy making of the university by faculty, staff, and students led to widespread animosity towards the administration and the office of the president. Edward Hall's last major contribution to Western was completion of the new University Act of 1967, designed to implement a new system of governance. George Edward Hall's vision for the success of the university never wavered. Mindful of the past history of the university and the rich legacy around him, he was critical of newer faculty who were impatient for change. Upon his retirement in 1967, a London Free Press editorial stated, "It is a measure of the man that he could turn theoretical failure into practical success by directing the pressure for growth into the most constructive channels."
During the first 67 years of the 20th century, the Board of Governors had appointed just 4 presidents. Within the next 2 decades, they would appoint 4 more. David Carleton Williams assumed office at the same time as the new University Act of 1967 was implemented. Western was now the second largest university in the province, and the campus became a city within a city. Student protests gathered momentum, and Williams had to deal with everything from verbal confrontations between student groups to sit-ins and occupation of administrative offices. Protests against numerous other causes became so frequent that several visiting students from the University of California at Berkeley referred to Western as the Berkeley of the North. President Williams believed that television had great potential as a useful teaching aid.
I think it's a developing thing, and certainly more and more of the universities of the province are realizing this. The classic instance, surely, is its tremendous use in science for science demonstrations in large classes.
He recruited Peter Somerville from CFPL TV in London to oversee the establishment of a centralized television service with a staff of 16 full-time and 35 part-time technicians and camera operators. The studio, located in the basement of the Natural Science Center, was connected by cable to several lecture rooms. The main venue was Room 1 with a huge rear projection screen. Many faculty, such as physics professor Graham Rose, were comfortable with the system. Others were not so keen. Lack of training and familiarity with television studios were major problems. Professors Helen Battle and Don McMillan taped many zoology demonstrations, but McMillan later remarked, "I can do this in my sleep, but under the lights, cables, and cameras, I feel like a total idiot." The D.B. Weldon Library in 1971 was the largest structure to date on campus, and a radical departure from the traditional collegiate Gothic architecture of sandstone facings and limestone trim. A year later, the even more massive Social Sciences Center was built on an area known in Sherwood Fox's day as the Somerville Playing Fields. To the west, the University Community Center offered retail shopping and multi-use athletic and recreational facilities. In 1975, the J. Gordon Thompson Recreational and Athletic Building further enhanced athletic facilities with an indoor track and hockey and curling rinks. President Williams completed a second term in office and reflected on his presidency.
All our hopes were pinned on making the university a genuinely democratic institution, and this University Act that was put through made that possible. But of course all it was words on a piece of paper, and what had to be done was to translate those words on a piece of paper into the daily warp and woof and daily functioning and decision-making of the university. And that took 10 years to do. And I think, if you want to say in a word, what did I do? Well, I made that act work.
As chairman of the Board of Governors of the University of Western Ontario, I now install you, George Edward Connell, in the office of President and Vice Chancellor.
I welcome you on behalf of the Senate, and I request the Secretary of the Senate to robe you.
Unlike Williams, Connell was not an accomplished frontman, but he did bring a quiet dignity and respect to the office of the President at a time when the campus was reeling from massive government underfunding and continuing student unrest. A few months into his presidency, Western turned 100.
Is everybody happy?
But it would be a bittersweet year. However, for now, it was party time. Campus celebrations began on March the 7th with a release of 100 bright red balloons, and first-year students celebrated with a cheer-off and a huge cake. Western alumni sponsored a variety show featuring Paul Soles and Max Ferguson.
Say the magic word and win Thames Hall. There. Did you go around your lectern?
The engineers, not to be outdone, offered a novel solution to the parking problem. A conference of the International Society of Music Education featured a presentation by Shinichi Suzuki, founder of the Suzuki method of teaching violin. In the first of several centennial convocations, Governor General Jules Léger was honored with a degree and a plaque. A highlight for many alumni remained the many class reunions held on campus and throughout the city in celebration of the centennial homecoming.
In 1978, enrollment decreased by 15%. And over the next 4 years, the administration was forced to cut $4 million from the operating budget. On August the 31st, 1984, George Connell became the second president in the history of the university to tender his resignation. When he departed to accept the presidency of the University of Toronto, the board took the unusual step of appointing Vice President of Administration Alan Adlington as acting president.
In the judgment of the board, they felt it was the best balance of present workloads to maintain the momentum of the two offices that Dr. Leith and I now hold.
Although in office for only 10 months, the Board of Governors nevertheless officially numbered his term of office, making him Western's 7th president. Alan Adlington had graduated from Western under the Veterans Act following World War II, thus making him the only Western student to ever assume the office of president. Western's 8th president, K. George Peterson, became the spokesman for the largest fundraising campaign in the university's history and the development of significant liaison with private enterprise. The new vice president external, Marjorie Miller, directed the largest fundraising campaign in the university's history. Officially launched on April the 3rd, 1989, the Renaissance campaign exceeded the total of all funds raised by the university in the previous century. Major building projects included the new Visual Arts Building, made possible by a $1 million donation from the John Labatt Company. The Western Science Center owes a great deal to a successful science pioneer and inventor who had graduated with a BSc in chemistry from Western in 1935. Laureen Patterson came forward with a generous donation for the building that now bears her name. Western was to later honor Laureen Patterson with an honorary degree.
I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Science, honoris causa. Congratulations.
Many perceive inventive people as being screwballs walking around in a dream. And it helps if they have a few tufts of hair sticking up.
Another benefactor, who was to remain anonymous, made a donation towards the new Science Library to honor the work and contributions of former Chancellor and London businessman J. Allen Taylor and his wife Betty. In 1966, Western acquired 50 acres of the Smallman property at the northwest corner of Windermere and Western Roads, and in 1989, a separate corporation was formed to develop this site as a research park. Windermere Manor and the adjoining newly constructed residence building became the first operational phase of the research park. In 1993, the first research building, named to honor Gordon J. Mogensen, a Western neuroscientist and former Dean of Graduate Studies, was officially opened.
The purpose of the research park is to promote interaction between the private sector and the university community. And there are at least two principal ingredients that are necessary for this to happen. One is the appropriate physical environment, and secondly is that commitment from committed tenants and the university community itself to make this work.
On July the 1st, 1994, Paul Davenport became Western's 9th president. He was regarded as a respected, efficient administrator with an approachable manner.
I am committed to a selective approach to setting priorities and making choices, and I think that's important for this university and for every university in the country.
In 1997, Western formed an alliance with the cities of London, Woodstock, St. Thomas, and the village of Grand Bend in a successful bid to host the 2001 Summer Games.
The university offered its residences for the athletes' accommodations, and the opening and closing ceremonies and some athletic events were to be held in the J.W. Memorial Stadium. However, a few months later it was realized that it would not be practical to modernize and update the venerable old stadium, and the Board of Governors approved construction of a new structure on the Huron Flats.
Shortly before the start of the 2000 football season, TD Waterhouse Stadium held an open house for the university community and the general public.
I think it's just phenomenal. It's like a Taj Mahal. The turf is soft, it's great.
It's a place where dreams will come true. It's a place where future generations will be reminded again and again and again of the spirit of community Congratulations. Thank you. Enjoy this evening. Enjoy the stadium. Good luck in the season opener on the 16th, and good luck in 2001.
The opening of the 2001 Summer Games on the evening of August the 11th was a source of great pride for the Alliance and a public relations coup for the university. On May the 20th, 1999, Intercollegiate Athletics hosted a tailgate party to kick off the final season of football in the J.W. Little Memorial Stadium. A special guest was Dr. Charlie Thompson, who played for the 1929 Western Mustangs against Queens in the inaugural game. Before the final game on October the 30th, London photographer Jason Sellinger recreated that original pose using a vintage circuit camera similar to the one used in 1929. Attending the game were over 100 Littles, all descendants of J.W. For over 20 years, Professor Emeritus Alan Philbrick had run a victory lap around the stadium each time the Mustangs scored a touchdown. Now, at 85, Philbrick, dubbed Albert by his many fans, ran his last lap before hanging up his shoes. As Western prepares for the future, much construction is again evident on the campus. Private and corporate gifts and over $40 million from the Superbuild program is providing for classroom upgrades and new buildings. The first project completed is the 700-seat lecture theater adjoining the Natural Sciences Center. A teaching annex has also been added to the engineering building. Nearing completion is the Thompson Advanced Technology Center, and a North Campus building will offer research and teaching space for the Faculty of Information and Media Studies and the Faculty of Science.
The campus scene today is a far cry from that of the beginning of the 20th century, when Western struggled for survival. As we move forward into the 21st century, faculty, staff, students, and alumni are building on the rich legacy of past achievements and the vision of our early founders. If some of those 1878 founders were to see Western today, they might be surprised, even shocked, at the growth and changes that have taken place. But not Bishop Isaac Helmuth. I imagine that he would say that everything is exactly as it should be.